Travel and Things, in association with Ruggedware, Real People, Real Clothing, Real Solutions, presents In Conversation With. I am your host, David Batsoffen, and I'm so glad to have as my guest today the author of a brand new book, James Hendry, with his book Return to the Wild. He hasn't quite yet returned to the wild, but he's currently in the urban jungle. James, good morning. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Good morning to you. Yes, the urban jungle of Westville, Durban.
Oh, is that where we find you today?
That's where I am now, looking out over some big trees, which I can't identify, and there's some monkeys in the trees, which is quite nice.
I was going to say in Westville, Durban, that's normally the case. So,
Yes.
yet another one in the series, published by
Yes.
Pan Macmillan.
Yeah.
Tell us about this, because this is the third. So is it?
It's the third in the series, yes.
Okay, so there are going to be more, no doubt.
Well, it depends on how this one sells.
So tell us about the MacNaughtons and how much of James Hendry is actually in this book.
Well, for those who have never come across the series, it's about basically two brothers, Angus and Hugh MacNaughton, who are completely different in character and in just general outlook. And one is a tall, gregarious, sort of happy-go-lucky, people-loving host, if you like, and the other is a surly, sarcastic, deeply cynical human being.
Oh, which one is based on you?
Yes, yes. He's also quite short, poor chap. And they go off into the bush in the first book to be a camp manager or an assistant camp manager or host in one of these five-star game lodges. And the younger one, at least the older one, Angus, who's 4 years older than Hugh, goes off to be a trainee game ranger. And it's all about they really detest each other at the beginning of the first book. And they come at the end of the first book, they come to a sort of understanding without giving too much away. And the second book is they've kind of moved on in their careers slightly. There's always conflict between them because they just don't see the world in the same way. So it's quite a nice device, I suppose, to use to create conflict in the book. And then in the third book, which is the last one that we've done, called Return to the Wild, it's 4 years on from the end of the second book. Angus has been in Cape Town teaching the guitar for various reasons, which you learn about at the beginning of the book. And Hugh has been promoted and he's doing very well at the lodge. And Angus is called back to the lodge through various, for various reasons. He goes back to the lodge to train a group of motley would-be game rangers, if you like, or guides. And that's his job. And it's all about it's the same goings on behind the scenes at a lodge. I guess there's a bit more of an intimate idea of what goes on in training rangers at one of these five-star lodges. I've obviously done quite a lot of that myself. And so it, takes you down that sort of road, which is quite fun and gives space for a huge number of new characters, funny characters, some serious characters. Just sort of takes you behind the scenes. It's a behind the scenes look at the goings on at Sasekile Private Game Reserve.
Do people have to read the books in order, or can they just pick up like this new one and start here and then go, okay, this is interesting. Let's see the backstory.
Yeah, they could absolutely just pick this one up. And I mean, the publisher is always very definite with me when I start writing these things. They say you need to explain X, Y, and Z because somebody coming to this for the first time won't know what's going on. And it's an interesting question because I think like all artists, for want of a better term, we all like to think that our latest work is the best work that we've done. And I don't know that that's always the case, but I do think, based on feedback not from myself but from others, that this is my best work as an author. And so in some ways I do want people to read this first and then go back, but if they did the opposite, well, that would be fine.
Doesn't make any difference.
It doesn't actually make any difference.
If they read from 1 to 3 chronologically, then they'll
Yes,
see how your writing has progressed. So when they get to 3, they
I
go,
think they will.
wow,
Yeah,
this is his best work.
yeah. I think they will, and they'll also. What's really nice is I think what we have, and I say we because authors like to think of this as being their own projects, but editors and publishers, if you've got good ones, make a huge difference to how things move.
Mm.
I think we've really developed these characters nicely over the course of 3 books. Very immature, very young in the first ones, and they're definitely got a lot more mature and outlook on life as we move into the
Yeah.
3rd one.
How difficult is the writing process for you?
I think, like for anybody, it's difficult. I like to relate the story of I was at the French Hook Literary Festival many, many, many years ago, and I was sitting with a very well-known, extremely successful, highly skilled British author. He was South African, he's British now, and he shall remain nameless. But I remember him describing in one of these interview, whatever you call them, one of these sessions, how he'd met his publisher in the lift and he'd been in floods of tears about just not being able to create sufficiently. And I remember thinking to myself, good God, man, that's I've just never experienced that. Yes, I have difficulty from time to time. I get into you get writer's block. There's no question that you run out of ideas and you need something to pull you out of it. But no, I've never been in floods of tears over being unable to write. And yeah, look, I find the process highly enjoyable, especially, and I think this is unusual when I get to the editing phase, because once it's all out there, I feel, once I've got an outline of the story and I've got an outline of, what's going on with each incident, I really enjoy the editing side of things. And tweaking this and that, and then adding different passages and saying, "Oh, hang on, what about going away in this direction?" The most difficult part is coming up with that storyline,
Yeah,
and making sure that the characters move.
do you storyboard, or do you let the characters sort of take over and direct you rather than you direct them as to where you want them to be?
I do a bit of both. So I always start off. I start off with I take 2 foolscap pieces of paper and I stick them together. So I've got like a long piece of paper, and I literally draw a story arc.
Yeah.
So I draw like it's basically a hyperbola, I suppose, and with a peak just before the end of the book, and then sort of tails off, and then I draw 3 smaller ones underneath that. So we've got 3 acts in theory. Each one's got to have a kind of apogee, and then sort of slowing down of the energy, but everything building up to the main denouement, as it were, towards the end. And I very much try and follow a hero's journey. So we come to the point where the hero is, how is he ever going to get out of the situation, kind of thing, and then we find a way for him to get out of it. Very much that kind of traditional hero's journey. And then I try and write down what's going to happen, and then I start writing. And never will what I've originally thought is going to happen. Never will it happen. So the characters absolutely do take on a life of their own. And I remember reading that before I started writing in earnest and thinking, what a load of cods. I mean, this is a completely imaginary character. How can it ever take on a life of its own?
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what happens. You really, especially if you write every day, if you write for a bit and then leave it, and then and then come back to it, you lose touch with your characters.
Yeah.
And they don't. But if you push them and you write them every day, they literally do take on a life of their own. So yeah, I start off with that, with my kind of arc, if you like, and then I'll start writing, and then the arc will modify as we go along. Yeah.
Do you find that you start off with a character that you like, and you think he's going to be with you for the entire book, and then it gets to a point and you go, you know what, I actually don't like this character at all. He's going to be trampled to death by an elephant or shot by a poacher, and I don't give a rat's rear end.
Yeah, it does absolutely happen. And funnily enough, in this book, and I won't say which characters, but there was one character I started off with that I really thought was going to be, I thought I'd get rid of him halfway through the book, and he turns into one of the main characters. I really started to enjoy him.
Yeah.
And there's another character who she was going to be the kind of the love interest for all the way through. And eventually she just kind of fell out of favor and really wasn't anymore for, she just wasn't strong enough. And so there's another one that comes in.
Yeah.
And that's always such fun. I'm trying to think if I've ever had a character who halfway through I thought, this guy's a real ass. I'm going to get rid of him.
Yeah.
I think what happens is they just fade into the background. They stop being important to the story.
And they stop interesting you, perhaps,
Yeah,
because you're
exactly.
writing it, and you must get to a point where, as you say, a background character becomes a lead, or a lead just loses your interest. So you just let them fade away.
Exactly.
They get into a game drive vehicle and they're never seen again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned writing every day. Did you have to be disciplined to put together a book that is this thick?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was lucky that at the beginning of the year I had time.
Yeah.
I had resigned from the job I was doing, and I had some private safaris that I was doing, and I had gaps. It was before I made the catastrophic error of becoming a father.
I'll drink to that.
And so I had, thank you. I had a lot of time at the beginning of the year, and I'd sit down I'd use the Stephen King method. And if you read, I don't read a lot of his stuff because I don't like the genre, but I read a book of his called The Craft. It's a very short book on his writing style.
And how to write, yeah.
Yeah. And he writes 2,000 words a day before he does anything else. So he won't answer an email. He won't do anything else. And that might take him 2 hours. It might take him 8 hours. And that is what I decided to do. 2,000 words a day, and those are unedited. So, I mean, you might actually some days use nothing of what you've written.
Yeah.
But I found for me, once I had those 2,000 out the way, I felt satisfied. And especially if I actually wanted to write more, I would stop myself because there's nothing, it's very difficult to sit down in the morning knowing that you ended your last day thinking, I don't know what's going to happen here. But it's really exciting when you come to thinking, great, I can't wait to push this forward kind of thing. So yeah, that's my method. My method is to try and do 2,000 words a day. That's the discipline. Weekends, I'd often sit and just do some editing. That was like a reward for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does take discipline. Absolutely. It also takes, a deadline, from the publisher saying on the 13th of February, I want to see the full manuscript. And
because there's nothing worse than giving you an open-ended deadline. They go, send us a book when you're ready.
Hopeless.
14 years later, they'll phone you and go, what happened to the book?
No, hopeless. And I mean, I've actually had that. I've had that. I've been meaning to do a kid's book for I don't know how long. And I mean, they're not even long. And because there's no do it now.
Yeah. I have an editor that I've worked with for years. I write for a magazine that he edits. And he often would say to me, have you got a story about? And I'd go, yeah, when do you want? And he goes, whenever. And he learned very quickly that whenever doesn't hack it with me. If he phones me at 8 o'clock in the morning and says, can I have 1,000 words by 10? He'll get them by 9:30 with photographs. Never missed a deadline, but give me one to work to. James, the characters in Return to the Wild, obviously some are spillovers from the previous 2 books. There's some new characters. Have people with similar or the same names come to you and go, why did you make that name the baddie? Or have you gone out to auction and gone to your mates and your family and go, listen, if you want to be in the book, I'll take a donation to charity, but you can't tell me what sort of character you want to be?
No, the names come entirely out of my head for the most part. It is very funny, though, when people come up to me and say, I can't believe you wrote X, Y, or so-and-so into the book there. she's going to be so upset. But that's not what I've done. You know, this person seeing somebody completely in what is an imaginary character to me, they're seeing something else. And others are largely based on people I know with different names.
Yeah,
nobody
obviously.
picks it up. So it's very funny to see that happen. And I mean, one of the most obvious characters was definitely, I'm not even gonna vaguely hint at which one it was, but you know, she's a ridiculous character, and in all three books, mostly the first one. And so obviously based on somebody that I know, because she was just too good a character to leave out. And yeah, some people have picked it up, but I don't think she ever did, thankfully. And she doesn't end up meet with a sticky end or anything like that, so that's quite fun. But it is very funny when people come and say, you know, I see who you mean there. It's very funny. I got that. No, that's really not what was going on.
100% wrong.
Yeah. But obviously, all the characters are amalgams of people I've met. You know, they have to.
Yeah, obviously, because they say you must write about what you know, and it's easy. I mean, the business that you're in, you have met some awesome characters along the way who have both worked with you and against you, have been helpful in your career or not helpful, and now you have the opportunity, thanks to Pan Macmillan, of putting them in the series, and getting your own back subtly, if nothing else. In true James Hendry fashion.
Yes.
Do you often with manuscripts, I found with authors that I've interviewed, James, there comes a point where it's difficult to let go for them. They've put together, I don't know, 80,000 words of a book. It's taken them 1 year, 2 years, 10 years to put the book together. But they struggle with that, and they rode off into the distance. The end. What was that like for you when you finally put the manuscript, now digitally, not in paper form, in an envelope, and said to your publisher, there, do what you will with it?
I'm very much less ego driven about it than I used to be. I do think there's a balance to be had. I think that, look, for me in general, I find that a relieving day. I don't find it a day that it's like letting my child leave home. I don't have that experience. I know a lot of people do. I don't think I'm a huge perfectionist. I understand the imperfections of art, and I also accept that this is not the idea behind this is not to create a Pulitzer Prize winning piece of artistic work that only extremely erudite and brilliant literary fundies are able to understand. You know, that's just not the vibe. My vibe here is to tell a good story that'll make people laugh,
inform, educate, and entertain. That's what
exactly. That's really that's the idea. So it's not hard for me to say, here you go. What is difficult though is, and I certainly at the beginning, when people suggested changes, I was very ego driven about saying, no, I don't want to change that. I want to leave this like it is because it's my idea.
Yeah.
And I've become much better at saying, look, you guys are the publishers. You publish thousands of books every year. You know what works. So I would say 80% of the time, if they suggest a change, I make it.
Yeah.
20% of the time, you know, they can make mistakes. There's no question they can make mistakes, and I'll say no. That's going to stay.
Yeah. There's one problem with a book like this, and that is that I don't know about others, but it works for me. This is how it works for me. You start reading the story, and then you realize that your read speed is starting to accelerate because the story is accelerating. And then you get to a point where you go, no, I must slow down because I want this book to last. I'm going away for a week. You know, I've got time to read it. I don't want to finish it on day 2 and then have nothing to do for the rest of the holiday type of thing. Because this is a great beach read, by the way, or bush read for that matter. Have you any advice for people as to pacing themselves when they read your novels? And it is a novel, by the way. It says so. This is not real life. This is not a reality TV show, people. This is a novel. Take it as such.
Yeah.
The disclaimer.
You know, I have had exactly the same experience where you love a book so much, and so when somebody says something like that, like I started reading it fast, it's a huge compliment because it means that you're really enjoying it. That's what I do when I really enjoy a book, and I have exactly the same experience. Not so much that, oh dear, I'm going to finish it too soon, but I feel like I've missed stuff because you'll read a line or two towards the back of the book, and you'll think, geez, that's great writing. I must have missed quite a lot because in between the story being told, the yarn is a whole lot of nuance.
Yes,
that if you're only focused on the story, you're going to miss. So yeah, my advice would be to have a slow gin and tonic while you're reading.
I read one particular book, not in this genre. It was in the music industry. I started at 8 and I finished at 2 in the following morning. I read the book right through the night. And I thought, you know what, if I'm awake, so's the author going to be. And I sent them, and I'm being very specific, non-gender specific. I sent them a text at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, "You've kept me up all night. I hope this wakes you." And I got a response.
Oh, good. That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's no really, I mean, there are two great compliments people can pay me. One is that it made them laugh, and two is that they were really sad when it ended.
Yeah. Well, there's the next one to look forward to in the hopefully not too distant future.
No, I hope not.
Yeah. The book is Return to the Wild. It's published by Pan Macmillan. The author, sitting here with me today, is James Hendry. James, once again, thank you very much for a wonderful, wonderful read.
My pleasure.
It's available already. It's out in real form. Look, it has writing on it. It's not just a mock-up.
Yes.
And it's available online as an ebook, no doubt.
It's available online as an ebook. If you are not in South Africa, you can get it on a thing called Lightning Source through Amazon, where they'll actually print you a copy if you want that, which is great. It's not cheap, but we'll do it like that. And then I've just recorded the audiobook. And I think that'll come out very soon on Audible.
Great stuff.
So that's, and you can get it in all good bookstores. You can
even get it in bad bookstores.
You can get it in really awful bookstores.
You can find it in a back alley. A guy will hand it to you in a brown paper packet and take your money with pleasure.
Absolutely. Yes.
James, as always, it's great chatting to you. I wish you and the family a very blessed Christmas and a happy, happy New Year.
Likewise.
And we will chat about your next adventure in the new year, because I don't want to spoil it with these viewers. I don't want to dilute this with that. So we'll chat again early in the new year. Take care.
Thanks, David.
Be safe. And once again, thanks for this. James Hendry, Return to the Wild, published by Pan Macmillan. Cheers, Henry. What am I saying? Henry James.
Henry James.
Yeah. Henry James. There was a writer called Henry James, I think.
There was.
But it's not
somewhat more successful than me. No, not me.
James, thanks so much for being my guest here.
All right.
In Conversation With. Bye for now.
Cheers.